Now that we know the four different types of market structures, which are the perfect competition markets, then monopolistic competition, oligopoly, then monopoly, I would like to go through one by one in slightly more detail, trying to understand the key characteristics of the market and significant points that you need to understand with respect to the demand, supply, price, etc., with respect to each of these markets. So, initially, we'll get started with the perfect competition kind of market. We have already discussed quite sufficiently, and even we know a few interesting aspects regarding the perfect competitive market. Going with the basic structure of it, the number of firms in that market are very large. Huge number of firms, which means the market share for each of the firms is very, very small. And all the firms are price takers only. The price is determined as the equilibrium price that comes based on the intersection of the entire industry's demand and the supply curve. So whatever the price that comes out of it, that is what will be the price that would be accepted by all the firms in a perfectly competitive market. No firm can individually set its own price. And at the same time, this is a market where anyone can enter into the business at any point in time, and they can very well exit out of the business also at any point, which means literally there are no entry and exit barriers in this kind of industry. But the only thing is, every firm typically will produce and sell a very homogeneous kind of a product. So you don't see much of product differentiation and product variety in this kind of markets, right? And one important point that we need to understand with respect to this perfect competitive markets is both the buyers and the sellers, both the consumers as well as the producers of the various goods, they have perfect knowledge on the market. What I mean by that is consumers, they have very good understanding of the prices of each of the products, the quality, the availability, because almost every shop sells the same at the same price. The regular mom and pop stores are probably the typical stores that you see in each apartment, where every apartment sells some regular groceries and all that stuff. You find that the prices for them are more or less fixed. So consumers have a good knowledge about all of them. And similarly, the producers also have a good amount of knowledge. What is the cost? What is the technology? What are the opportunities that are available? Probably you look at a simple repairing shop. What should be the cost of repairing a particular bike or repairing a particular scooter? The cost of it is more or less known. Even the producers know it, even the consumers know it. And the technology, what are the opportunities that are there? Every information is known to every producer as well as the consumer. And this entire structure really makes an assumption that the customer actually acts rationally. He knows the information, he acts according to the information. He buys only the cheapest and the best quality kind of products. So that's the reason we see that the demand curve in this kind of market is more and more perfectly elastic. The demand curve here will be the same as your average revenue curve, which will be perfectly horizontal. And this would be the price that would be charged by every firm for every customer per any number of units. So this is what comes out under the perfect competitive environment, and this is what we see as the demand curve. It's a perfectly horizontal kind of stuff. So this is the only kind of a market structure where the average revenue will be the same as the marginal revenue, because every customer is charged the same price irrespective of whatever is the quantity that is being purchased. The pricing does not change. Whereas in a traditional environment, we see that the demand curve has to be more and more downward sloping, because the more and more quantity I want to sell, I may have to reduce the price. So the demand curve may be downward sloping, which means my marginal revenue curve has to be even more downward sloping. That is in a traditional scenario. Whereas in a regular, in a perfect competitive kind of an environment, I see that the demand curve is very much flat, because if one firm is actually increasing the price a little bit, everyone will move away from that particular firm. So it will lose all its consumers to its competition, and it will literally be winded out of the business. Whereas on the other side, if it reduces the price a little bit, probably it may get a big business, but at the same time, it may not make any kind of profit, which is the reason we talk about the price at which it is selling should be the intersection of the industry's demand and supply curve. That price is charged by every firm in this particular industry, and because the price is constant throughout, even the marginal revenue will be the same as that of the price. So these four things, the price should be equal to average revenue, should be equal to marginal revenue, and this is purely based on the demand. So that's one interesting characteristic that we see with respect to a perfectly competitive kind of market. Then, now let's look at the scenario of short run versus long run equilibrium. We all know in the short run, a few costs are fixed. Only a few of them are variable. So generally what we see is your average cost will be higher than the average variable cost, and the stretch between the two, the vertical distance between the two, is what will contribute to my average fixed cost. Fair enough. Now, whenever we are talking about understanding the short run behavior in case of perfectly competitive market, I need to define what is the short run. That much of time where no new firm enters into that industry. And first of all, here the entry barriers are very, very low, which means it's very easy for the firms to enter into the industry. But when I'm using the word short run, I'm simply making an assumption that this is that smallest time period wherein no new firm is entering into this particular industry. So first thing, a few important points in any case which I have to remember. The firm has to produce an output where MR equal to MC. Now MR curve is the same as my price curve. Right? MR curve is the same as my price curve. I'll see where MR equal to MC. This is the profit maximizing output. So in this case, Q1 is my profit maximizing output. Now for this Q1, I'll check out what is my average total cost. So I'll look out for the average cost curve. This is my average cost curve. And I will look out for the average revenue curve. The price curve is the average revenue curve. Here AC1 is my average cost. P1 is my average revenue. So there is a situation of loss that is coming in this diagram. Look at this diagram. Right? This is the average cost curve. This is the marginal cost curve. Okay, where the marginal cost is intersecting the marginal revenue. That much of output is the profit maximizing output. For this profit maximizing output, the average revenue is P1 and the average cost is AC1. So what I simply see is if P is greater than AC1, the company is making a profit. So there is, in this particular business, whatever the profit the company is making, I call this as the normal profit only. This is the normal profit which the firm is making. So at in any cost, the MR equal to MC is that kind of an output where the profit will be maximized, and if at all the firm is making a loss, that loss would be minimized, right? Now, whatever is the difference between the AR and AC, average revenue and average cost multiplied by the quantity is what will give me the profit maximized in the overall profit at that maximized level of the output. But what we see is in the short run, because a few of the costs are fixed, I would always take a shutdown decision by comparing the average revenue with the average variable cost. As long as the average revenue is greater than the average variable cost, I'll continue the production and selling because the difference is contributing to some extent covering my fixed costs which are already sunk. But only at a point where my average revenue is much lesser than the average variable cost, that is when I take a decision with respect to shutting down the business. Then, if I look at one interesting point with respect to the perfect competition is the marginal cost curve is same as the supply curve. This happens only in case of the perfect competitive market. Why do we talk about it? First of all, the profit maximizing output. We know where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs, right? And if I see the marginal cost curve, okay, let's say this is the marginal cost curve. Now, if the price is at, let's say, P1, so in a perfectly competitive market, AR is also equal to MR equal to price. So this will be my MR, which means my profit maximizing output is Q1. The profit maximizing output is Q1, which means as a producer, I want to supply Q1 quantity. At price P1, I want to supply a Q1 quantity. Similarly, if the price is coming to P2, what is the profit maximizing output wherever MR is cutting the MC? MR becomes, now this is the new MR. This is cutting the MC here. So Q2 will be my profit maximizing output. Now if I join all the points for different layers of price, it is nothing but this is the supply curve itself. Because for different prices, what is the quantity that I am supplying is what is my supply curve. So we can very well define the supply curve, short-run supply curve. The firm's short-run supply curve is the marginal cost curve above the minimum average variable cost. Why is that additional point that I am bringing in? Because as long as the price is above it, let's see now. Let's assume that the price is set at P1. So the profit maximizing quantity is Q1. And for that quantity, it is having a price of P1. So average revenue is P1. So the total revenue is P1 Q1. Now what is the average cost for it? For Q1, average cost is somewhere close to P2. But this box is the traditional profit per unit and the overall profit that the firm is making. Now similarly, when you look at if the price is P2, somewhere here, the quantity that is worth producing is Q2 and the revenue is Q2 times AR2. Okay. Then what is the cost? Even the average cost curve is there itself, which means it's almost a no profit, no loss kind of a scenario. But still the profit, the price is greater than the average variable cost, so it will keep continuing. Think of the another scenario where we are setting the price at P3. If the price is at P3, look at what is the profit maximizing output, where MR is cutting the MC. So Q3 is the profit maximizing output. At Q3, the price that is set is P3, which means the revenue is P3Q3. At Q3, the average cost is somewhere close to P2, which means there is a loss. But what we are simply saying is the average revenue at least is slightly greater than the average variable cost. So the firm will still continue producing. So it will keep supplying this much quantity at different prices. But if the price is set, let's say at P4, if the price is set, let's say at P4, the profit maximizing output is where MR is cutting the MC. So this is Q4 should be the quantity that should be produced. But for this Q4, the price is, the average revenue is P4, but the average cost is somewhere this much. Average variable cost is somewhere this much. So the average revenue is lesser than the average variable cost. So the firm will not supply anything. So at any price which is below the average variable cost, below the minimum average variable cost, the firm will not supply anything, which means the supply curve does not come in at those prices. So that's the reason we say that in case of perfect competition, the short run supply curve is that portion of the marginal cost curve which is above the minimum average variable cost curve. And this part, whatever I have highlighted, this part is the supply curve in the perfect competitive environment. And when I'm looking at for the industry, it's a simple summation of the short run supply curves across the various individual firms. And when it comes to the long run, what is the difference now? In the long run, there is nothing called fixed costs. So probably whatever we are calling as the average variable cost is same as your average total cost also. Right? Total variable cost is also same as total cost, because at the same time there is nothing called fixed cost in a long run. Now what is the definition of the long run? It is that much period of time where a new firms can quite comfortably enter into the industry. So what typically happens wherever there is a profit that is possible. Now let's say the initial pricing is based on the demand and supply, the intersection of the demand and supply S1 and D. There is a price P1. So let's say every firm is charging the price P1. So the average revenue is AR1 and the marginal revenue is MR1. Now let's say the demand for something has gone up. So now look at the firms, probably if they are producing at this level, look at their, this is the marginal cost curve, this is the average cost curve. So the profit maximizing output is where MC will cut the MR. This is the Q1 is the quantity where MC is cutting MR. So for Q1 quantity, every firm will produce a Q1 quantity and sell it at AR1. But corresponding to this Q1 quantity, the average cost is somewhere close to AR2. So this difference, this highlighted area is like the profit, supernormal profit for the individual firm. So this supernormal profit which the individual firm has generated will result in more new firms entering into the industry. So more and more new firms entering, the supply curve will shift to the right. So once the supply curve shifts to the right, demand remaining the same, the price has to actually fall. So the overall new equilibrium price comes down to P2. And once the price comes down to P2, now you could see in the same diagram, if the price comes to P2, the profit maximizing output will be Q2, which means because of the supply, every firm will reduce the production and look at the average revenue is more or less similar to your average cost there, which means there is no supernormal profit that is getting generated. So in the long run, more and more supply increases. So because of that, the price will fall and the firms will start making only a normal profit in the long run. So that's the reason we talk about the market price as long as it is equal to long run average cost of producing the good, if the firms will typically continue in the long run. Anything the price average revenue is lesser than the long run average total cost, the firm will exit out of the business. That is where it takes a shutdown decision. All right. So this is what is the kind of understanding you require as far as the perfect competitive markets are concerned. All right.